All right, thank you all for joining us today. We're going a deep dive into adapting to hybrid, returning back to school using the station rotation model. And so my name's Andrea Quintana. I'm a teacher support specialist, and I'll be joined by several of my colleagues throughout the presentation today. If you have any questions, make sure you drop them in the chat or use the PearDeck when it's time for that. But we hope that you leave today with a really solid understanding of how to apply station rotation with kids both at home and in person. And so we hope that you can make sure to get all of your questions answered by the end of today. And so thank you all for joining onto that PearDeck. It does just make it a little bit more interactive and give us some feedback along the way as well. So you can see that code for the PearDeck up in the corner if you're still trying to join. And it's also in the chat for you. So again, just to kind of tell you that our objectives today are to really take a deeper dive and understand station rotation by looking at content as well as the technology tools to support that model. So again, the ideas that we're sharing today can be used fully or can be used in part just to make sure that your stations in your classroom and your teaching is working best for you and your students. So to start us off today, let's just take a minute to think about any initial questions that you have about coming back to school and about the station rotation model. So feel free to add those to your PearDeck or to the chat. And we'll just take 1 minute to think real quick. What are those quick questions that you had till we can make sure to get those answered for you today?
I'll read off some of the questions as they're coming in, just so we're aware. Do students need to move around the classroom for their rotations? How to manage both groups of students? Seems like that is our #1 question. I see that popping up a few times.
Perfect.
Can continue to add those and we'll continue on.
Yeah, and I think that most of those questions will be answered today, but make sure that you leave with clarity before you walk out today. So keep those in mind. Today, we're really going to talk about the content considerations. How do you really make the participation meaningful? What instructional strategies can be used during station rotations and the tech tools for the model. We're also going to talk about the content connections and how they're going to work best using some of these examples that we're going to share with you today. And then we're going to dive deeper into tech tools as possible solutions to create meaningful learning for your students, as well as provide some troubleshooting in case you get stuck or in case you need some answers to specific technology tools. We're also going to make sure that you have some instructional strategies. And again, these are just samples and models, and you can apply anything that's currently working in your current system. Again, the station rotation model is not students physically moving, but the idea that the students rotate through content throughout the day. So these aren't actual physical movements. You could use technology as your station tool, but basically students rotate through online, offline, and teacher-led instruction at different parts in their day. These can also be collaborative between students in person and at home, so that your teacher-led stations could possibly be mixed level grouping or differentiated based on need. And so it's not a physical movement, but more a movement of activity or objective that can happen during different parts throughout your day. Again, we've created some sample schedules for you, knowing not what your day looks like, but just blocking it up for you, knowing that there are times when you will meet with both your at-home and in-person students at the same time. And sometimes starting your day off with a community meeting is a great way to do that. And then differentiating what those small groups could be. Maybe you have one small group working directly with you while 2 other groups are doing independent work. And this could be also added into 4 or possibly 5 different groups, depending on the size of your class. Then at specific times in your day, the students will rotate the activities that they're doing, and you will get a new group that's going to be working with you independently. as well as collaboratively. And so you can just see some examples of what that might look like through the ELA and math block, as well as through a possible enrichment or intervention block as well. Again, your class will still all meet together, whole group, for any specials, possible whole group learning activities, mini lessons, or even social studies and science, right? And so the idea is to take whole group activities and then break them up into smaller groups. These groups, again, can be similar to what they've been doing virtually as well. If your students are very good at meeting with you and then going to do asynchronous work, consider that similar to station rotation. Other than this, also gives you an opportunity to meet directly with smaller groups of students to dive deeper into content. Some of those students might be sitting in front of you, and some of them might still be on a device. So we do have the sample schedule, both full day and half day, knowing that you might be bringing back small groups of students currently in a small group setting as well. So those are there for you as 2 different samples. As we talked about in our hybrid overview, we do have some considerations and benefits for this model. Again, to prioritize differentiated instruction, that time when the students can meet with you, and when you can give different assignments to different groups of students to really meet their needs. How students can focus on hands-on and collaborative knowledge by doing small group activities. They might be able to work together, and that you're going to get some real-time feedback because your students are going to have an opportunity to meet with you. Some of the considerations also is how to build stamina, how to address tech issues and behavioral issues. And many of these considerations, we're going to dive a little bit deeper as we continue this presentation with you today. The last piece of information is that this might be the best model for you if you prefer multiple learning opportunities for your students. If you've already been building in some of these structures during virtual and distance learning, continue those structures that are working for your students. Just because they're in the classroom with you, those structures don't need to change. Whatever's been working with you to make sure that your students are turning in work and showing some accountability for their own progress, continue those structures that have been in place, or start strengthening those as they get ready to move back to in-person. This model will also give you a time to meet with struggling students or smaller groups, and consider what that timing might look like if you already have students who meet with you frequently throughout the day, independently of the whole group. So consider continuing to build the schedule that already is working for you. We are going to show you a couple different tech tools today, and so hopefully that can also build on the capacity that you've already been working on. We want to pull your attention to this document here. It's a hybrid classroom and document organizing the physical space. So this deals a lot with the environment. We've taken some snapshots of classrooms that have been back in person and some routines that are really working for those teachers as they are part of in-person and online learning. And so while these considerations are for hybrid, they might be also considerations as you bring students back into your classroom environment. So you can dive deeper into that document and take a look at some of the suggestions from teachers who have been doing this for a while. Creating workstations, allowing your students a physical space that's kind of marked off, and possibly creating something similar to this with your environment that your students can work through prior to returning to your classroom. So they'll kind of already have some capacity for what it might look like in your classroom, and they'll anticipate what they're walking into prior to getting there. We've also created this as a PearDeck for you so that you can see how it might be a fun activity for your students the week prior to returning to do this with you or independently, and kind of walk through your classroom or even possibly the school to prepare them to return. Setting up some of those routines and procedures ahead of time and allowing them to kind of explore your classroom through a PearDeck like this might just give them the confidence and the procedures prior to returning. So hopefully you can take some time and dive a little bit deeper into that document. Again, any questions about things that I've covered currently, please make sure to drop them in the chat. We want to make sure that all of your ideas get answered before you leave. And as you consider moving forward with this station rotation, please feel free to reach out to us at any time for any additional information that you might need. And I'm going to pass it off to Rachel, I think. Yeah. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you, Andrea. So as we start to consider the station rotation model, this model relies heavily on routines and procedures. So our BSS team put together some considerations for you. You'll need to pre-teach before your students enter the classroom, so that transition's a little bit smoother. We need to plan what those routines and expectations will look like for students throughout the day so that they can relearn them at school efficiently. So we want to allow some space for our students to have voice in creating those expectations, just like we would at the beginning of a school year, so that they feel like they have some agency in what the classroom environment will be like, and to help them help us reflect on student needs. This will increase the likelihood that the expectations will be met. We also know that this is a stressful time, so that means it's going to be harder for our students to remember some of their expectations, and it might be harder for us as teachers to remember to give positive reinforcement. When our stress levels are high, you might have a hard time remembering to do that and to verbalize that for your students. So you might consider explicitly planning out some times during the day that you'll provide positive reinforcement, and even give yourself a little bit of a script so that you have something to say, so that you're not having to think of them on the spot. We also know that schools and classrooms that prioritize SEL see fewer behavioral issues, and they have better relationships between students and teachers. So by prioritizing SEL, you're making room for more learning in academic areas as well, because you are teaching skills that help students with their student behaviors and reducing disruptions. And then finally, the foundation for all of this is the relationship. If we do not maintain positive and authentic relationships with students, then we're not going to be able to create a constructive classroom environment. When the relationship is present, students are more likely to follow the expectations, participate in the classroom community, receive feedback well, and maintain better relationships with their peers. So kind of consider this back to school period, like the beginning of the school in the fall, when we really focus a lot of our time and energy on relationship building. And then down at the bottom of this slide, you'll see our BSS team emails, Anna Kay and Molly Keys, and they've also got a link to their YouTube channel there if you need some more ideas or information. So let's take a look at some of the content-related considerations. So we want to remember that these recommendations are applicable to any content area in any setting for this year. Because our time is so limited with our students, we really want to keep our lessons mini, short and concise and clear. So within those lessons, we should vary our instructional formats with participation strategies. From there, we can follow up the mini lesson with independent practice, which is what we're going to see in those rotations. So that our students have plenty of opportunities to engage with the content, especially when they're in person. So throughout those independent activities, repeating instructions and including visuals can support and increase participation. Finally, we want to find some opportunities to celebrate learning in some way when coming back together in the synchronous space. So our final framework that can be helpful for our remaining days of instruction is to consider how to best prepare students for next year rather than the mindset of catching them up. So how can we utilize our time most effectively with that framework in mind? So you might consider some different instructional strategies for your students in person, like including talk moves, plenty of discussion and debate, Kagan collaboration strategies, those interactive things that they've been missing in our distance learning environment, while still considering our students at home, using breakout rooms, choice boards, and learning journals, things that they might already be familiar with. So if you are following along on PearDeck, you should see a Padlet pop up on your sidebar. Because of the station rotation model requires some levels of independence and autonomy for your students, we need to consider some early finisher ideas as well as some accountability. So for your early finishers, we've got our students who might be working in a center and they finish all of their work. What are they going to do? You might consider developing some open-ended questions with a creativity element, something that might take them a while to work on, that might extend their learning even further. So I'm thinking about project-based learning activities, things like that. Writing journals, paper pencil activities. You could also consider an early finisher choice board. Maybe it has multiple options, and have that in a place in the room where students know that they can go select something to do independently if they finish their work. And then extension and investigation activities. That goes back to the idea of project-based learning and open-ended questions, something that your students can do a little exploration. So in that Padlet, we have a column there for station rotation model. We'd love to hear some other ideas that you have for early finishers. So if you want to add those in while I'm talking about accountability, that would be great. So for accountability, we need to consider also that our students are working independently or maybe in small groups. So you might consider ways that they will share out their learning after they've finished their center work. So you can use something like a random name picker to call on students to share what they've done. You could have a volunteer just report back from the group. You can have students share out something that stuck with them and something that was tricky. So stickies and trickies, excuse me. If you are using engaging with your distance learners, you might try a waterfall chat strategy where they all use the chat to respond and let you know what they were working on. And then, of course, you are going to see some more accountability ideas as we move into our tech tools in just a moment. But again, on that Padlet, I'm going to be quiet for just about a minute or two and let you add some ideas for that so that we can share it with other educators. Awesome. Thank you for taking the time to do that. If you're still writing, go ahead and finish up. I'm seeing some ideas for like catch-up work from other content areas, flashcards, reading articles. All great ideas. Okay, so again, if you are following along in PearDeck, this is another interactive slide. These are some of the other accountability tools that you might consider for your students. Flipgrid, PearDeck, and Jamboard for different centers. So I'd like you to circle which tool you are familiar with, or multiple tools if you're familiar with many of them. And we're really going to focus on these tech tools that will maximize your ability to effectively use the station rotation model. Give you just a second to find that and respond. Okay, lots of us have used Jamboard. That's great. A little familiarity with Flipgrid and PearDeck too. So let's start diving into the content a little bit. We'll return to those tech tools later on, but let's think about what your content might look like in these centers. So going back to the essential standards, I've chosen a second grade ELA standard here, which is to identify the main topic of a multi-paragraph text. So we know in station rotation, you might utilize guided reading for your small groups, which allows you to provide differentiated support for your students in that small group. You can balance your time between word study and comprehension skills during that time. And your students should have multiple opportunities to read that text. So consider using the same book for an entire week, or maybe even 2 weeks with our students, so that they can really get used to those routines. Virtually, you might have your students listen to the story on Benchmark. You could put it into a Jamboard or a Google slide. But try to focus on whatever you're doing right now in distance learning. Have that structure be the same for your students when you engage with them in the classroom through the screen. Then in person, you may decide to incorporate some collaborative structures or have more hands-on paper pencil activities. Just consider how you will make that safe and easy for your students to participate. So whether that's making photocopies of a page that you need them to annotate on, or setting aside a book bag for them, so that that will be their set of books for guided reading. So I've turned this grade 2 text, Living in Joshua Tree, into a Jamboard. So I just took screenshots of that book, and it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with Jamboard, so you may already know how to do that. So I'm not going to open that up today, but then students can annotate, and you can have sticky notes with questions on it so that students can engage in that guided reading. And you could use that for your students even in person. They could show up to your guided reading group with their device so that they have the book in front of them, and you don't have to worry about cleaning off books or sanitizing anything after they use it, because it will just be on their personal device. Another thing we thought about was using the plastic sleeves. So if you have like binder sleeves, you could slide the book even into that and let students write on top of it if you're focusing on a specific page, but just another idea there. So as students go through their literacy lessons, then teachers can provide independent and collaborative activities. Choice boards are a great way to do this, and it provides them with some agency to choose the activities throughout the week. And then it's also a little less planning for you. If you set up your whole entire week, then students can select different activities. So you might consider modeling this after daily 5 activities that you've had in the past. And with these choice boards, you may want to consider what accountability measures that you have for each center. So going back to those ideas about which tech tools will you use, will you have them turn in something, paper, pencil, how will you know what they're working on? This image on our slide deck here, it links to an example choice board that you can make a copy of and utilize with your students. So we have different activities for each one of those centers. Read to self, word work, work on writing, listen to reading, and then some extension activities. And a lot of those are in a virtual format. So you might consider how you could adapt those then for your in-person learners. So then let's think about math. It would follow a similar structure where you might have your students kind of flowing in between whole group lessons and independent small group activities, or you might front load the lesson with a whole group math lesson, and then they move into their centers and you block off an amount of time for them for that. So in math, you might project your resources simultaneously to the students at home and in person for the focus lesson. That allows time for your students at home to kind of check in and make sure that everybody's receiving that important, direct, explicit instruction. And it would also be very beneficial to incorporate some number sense activities for students during that time so that they're all building on those number skills. So Stepping Stones resources are available within Arrigo Slate. You probably know that inside of ClassLink. And PearDeck could be a great way to engage with your learners as you have some students at home and some students in person, because that way you can see that your students at home are engaged, but you can also focus on your students in class. So you might project it up and be teaching to your class, but have your students on a Google Meet so that they can follow along with the lesson and maybe engage and participate a little bit. So we've got a sample lesson here from Stepping Stones that you could present via PearDeck or even Jamboard. And then the math team put together some ideas here for differentiated activities so that you can scaffold these lessons for students. And then we would move into small groups for students to continue practicing those math skills independently or in small groups. So here we have another example of a choice board. And students can engage in independent practice with things like iReady, Khan Academy, Desmos, or other online math games. And there might even be some opportunities for your students to play games or work together over Google Meet in small groups. So you could have a student in your class log in with somebody at home and they could play a game together online. So a choice board like this can be completed throughout the week with some accountability systems of your choice to determine how students will demonstrate their understanding and learning from these choices, just like within ELA. So you also have some autonomy in how you present these choice boards. You can do a hyperlinked choice board like I've done here, where students click on the activity, all the instructions are already there and ready for them. Or you could do a printed version where students maybe get a packet of activities or you present it to them in another way. So then let's think a little bit too about that independent work, because you may decide to have students work independently in their centers rather than through collaboration. So students could engage in work with their Stepping Stones journal. You can think back to iReady assignments. And just like other content areas, you could have these be independent, but how will you consider that accountability piece? That is the big consideration for this entire model. You've heard me say that a lot. So it could be that they turn in their books and then you're grading them, or you could import these in, again, into PearDeck or Jamboard to check your students' work. Okay, so we're about to move into our portion on tech tools. And we would love your feedback here again so that we know where to focus our time. So I saw most of you know quite a bit about Jamboard, which is great. We'd like to know which tool you'd like to learn about. Jamboard, Flipgrid, or PearDeck? What is going to be the most useful? Give a few more seconds for you to respond. We're on slide 21 if that's helpful.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I switched over from my phone to my computer, and I don't have the PearDeck. Could you post the link for it?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, no problem. It looks like PearDeck is our winner, April. Oops, let me grab this link. So I'm going to hide those responses, and April, I will pass it off to you so you can share about some of these tech tools, and we can start to consider how these can be accountability tools for our students.
Okay, great. Well, hi everyone. My name's April. I'm with the EdTech team. So I'm just going to share with you a few different tools because we know that it's overwhelming with all of the tools and solutions that are out there. So we tried to narrow it down to 3 different tools. I will go a little, since that seems to be the consensus, I'll go a little bit deeper into Jamboard, and even Rachel can maybe share her screen and show like how you would install the add-on and that kind of thing if you've never used that. So hopefully you've all had a little bit of time to kind of dabble into these tools, but you know, for this specific purpose of station rotations, we thought we would just talk about, you know, why Jamboard is a solution. And so we thought this is really a great tool for whole group, small group, and independent work. You know, what I love the most about Jamboard is the ability to draw and giving students some prompts and allowing them that ability to just, you know, show what they know in a different way through drawing and maybe some photos and maybe even labeling. So there's lots of different things that you can do in Jamboard besides the sticky notes, which I think that we kind of get away from a little bit. And for those of you who are K2 teachers, one of the great things that is available that isn't present on all of the Chromebooks is that there is the ability for the it's the auto draw feature. So if they draw a picture, it'll try to guess what kind of picture they're trying to draw. So it'll recreate their picture for them if they feel unconfident, you know, in their drawing abilities like I do. Or also shapes. They can draw shapes and it will convert it into straight line shapes. And the other thing that I love is that they can write text with their finger and it will translate that into written text. And so it has these assistive tools that make Jamboard super efficient, especially for our younger students. So that is available on Jamboard for iPad, and it is available on some of the Chromebook models. So you may have seen that, or your students may have mentioned that or not. But we just love Jamboard for, you know, using those in stations and in centers for word work and writing and close reading kinds of text and responding. And we, you know, this obviously can be used whole group and in these, you know, smaller station rotations. I particularly love templates, and I love all of the templates that teachers have created all around the world and have given so freely. And so we put all of the templates that we love, we put them all in one folder, because why reinvent the wheel if you have something that somebody else has already created for you? So Rachel, if you go down to the next slide, there is, I just kind of took a screenshot of what all of those some of those templates look like, and we've included a link for you on them. But gosh, there's just, you know, ways that you can create base 10 blocks and you know, even drag and drop money to create a money station rotation where this group is working on maybe counting and sorting, and this group over here is working on, you know, base 10 blocks. Or gosh, you can do lots of different things in your math center just like you would in the regular classroom. So I just try to think of it like that, like what would I be doing in stations or rotations or centers in the classroom, and how can I replicate that as best as possible using Jamboard as a tool. So these templates are really, really great, and we'll include the link. And if you, I can't see the bottom, but if, hold on, let me move my cursor. Is it not on? Oh, you know what, Rachel, can you, oh, you probably can't refresh your screen, huh? Can you refresh? There you go. So I included this at the bottom because I think that this is really important. A lot of people think that when you share a, you know, a Jamboard that it has to be collaborative, but it doesn't have to be collaborative. You can actually just change the very end of the URL once you go to share it, and you can just change that word at the very, very end to copy. And then when you can highlight that entire link and paste that into Seesaw or Google Classroom, and it will force the students to make their own copy rather than collaborate on a copy as a whole class. So I think that that is a really important feature if you don't want them collaborating, because sometimes, you know, we want them to use all of the features of Jamboard, but we don't necessarily want it to be a collaborative Jamboard. So that's just you know, a tip or a trick to kind of take with you. And you just a side note, you can use those with all of the Google tools so that you can make them view only or copy or in a present mode. So you have a few different options, and it's just the very, very end of that URL. Let's see. So additionally with, and you can go to the next slide, Rachel. Additionally, we have a quick start PDF that just kind of shows you some features. of Jamboard, and then there's also a slide deck that has just a presentation of Jamboard, so that you can kind of, if you don't feel that comfortable with Jamboard, you can kind of go over that at your own pace and kind of learn on your own, just so that you can get a little bit more acquainted with that. And then on the next slide, I should have deleted that Jamboard template. I want to say that's a link to a different one, but I can't remember. But what I really wanted to point out was the Jamboard on the iPad, just so that if you are a K2 teacher, you do, I made this little graphic so that you can see what it looks like on the student end, because it's really hard, I think, for teachers to explain what they want students to do when they don't have the same device. So if you at least kind of know the interface and how it functions, that might make instruction a little bit easier for you if you are a K2 teacher without an iPad. So we just put that in there, and you can also download that PDF. Just to have handy when you are going over Jamboard at all. So are there any questions before we move on to the next tool? Probably not. You guys are probably awesome in Jamboard, but no matter how awesome we are, I think the templates are amazing and everybody can walk away. It's almost like a gift, you know, something that somebody else made that you can use. And I love all those templates. Yeah.
So could you go over again how to make the copy so that they can have and we can incorporate it into Google Classroom at the end of the URL?
Sure. So in Google Classroom, when you assign, you should be able to have that option for each student to make their own copy. But you can also, if you wanted just to, you even put this like in a chat in your Google Meet. When you go to share the file, there's the very long URL, and at the very end of the URL, sometimes it says like edit. There's a slash, and then there's the word edit, or there's the word I don't know. Sometimes there's different words, but it's usually after the word edit. You just click and highlight everything after that slash and delete all of that and just type in the word copy, and then copy that whole URL. And that's where you'll just give them that link. And when they click on it, it'll say you need to make a copy, and they don't have any other option but to make their own individual copy. And I have another graphic, Melanie, that I can share with CNI, and if they send any resources, it's just something that we shared on Twitter that shows all the different ways that you can change the URLs to make them appear differently for different purposes. So I'll do that. Okay, so moving on to Flipgrid. So if you've ever used Flipgrid, you know that it's a great video discussion and engagement tool to engage teachers with students and students with students. I like this, that connect your homies with your roomies. I think I want to say Rachel coined that phrase. I'm not really sure, but I like it. I have friends that they call the Zoomies and the Roomies for those that use Zoom. So we like this because it's a great accountability feature. And I love Flipgrid because you can pose a question basically anywhere in Seesaw, in Google Classroom, and you can have your students respond via video through Flipgrid, and they can almost always students will elaborate more in a video than they ever would if they write. So sometimes just giving them that differentiated instruction or that ability to do something a little bit differently can really engage students, and they love the fact that they can annotate on their photo and add stickers and really kind of respond maybe in a deeper way to drive home a point that maybe they want to make. We love that it just creates that space for student engagement. It kind of takes, our older students are a little bit intimidated at first to be on camera, but then they kind of just start doing it, and then it just becomes part of the norm. But we love this for stations because, you know, one station could just be like, okay, I want you to read this text, and maybe read it out loud and record it in Flipgrid. And then you can see over time how your reading fluency might get better. Or read this text and respond to this particular question. And that's a great way to use Flipgrid in a station rotation model. So there's lots of different ways that students can respond to questions or even respond to classmates. And so you can really kind of get some collaboration going even when you're not really in a collaborative kind of space. So, and you know, some ideas, if you do have a lot of kids in the classroom, just moving them around, putting some in hallways. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of make it work. I've seen teachers use like little milk crates and put those, like, you know, fold foam inside of them to make it almost like a recording booth so that kids can go in and make their videos. So there's lots of creative ways that you could get, you know, creative with allowing students that ability to respond and give them that student voice to respond to prompts or in individualized centers. Okay, let's see. You can go to the next one, Rachel. So same thing with Jamboard. We've included a how to get started with Flipgrid if you've never used it, with even just little arrows pointing to, you know, different parts of Flipgrid and just ways that you can use Flipgrid, some ideas to get started if you're stumped. So that's just a nice little quick PDF. And then we have a self-paced slide deck that you could go through as well. And of course, gosh, if you Google how to use Flipgrid in hybrid learning, you will see stuff that educators have posted all over the place just to inspire you with some new ideas. Any questions on Flipgrid before we move on to PearDeck? Nope, okay. We can go on to the next one. So PearDeck, all right. So if you've never used PearDeck, it is an add-on for Google Slides. And we love the fact that it allows students to really engage with the content, especially that teachers want to distribute and teach through, you know, interactive questions and the ability to draw. And you can really turn any lesson into a formative assessment. And there's a teacher-paced mode and there's a student-paced mode, which I'll show you a little graphic on the next slide. But we just love that you can do a whole group like we're doing now with this, you know, more of this teacher-paced mode. But the student-paced mode will really work really well in asynchronous work, in small group sessions, in these kinds of rotation models that we're talking about. And I think the thing that we love the most about these groups that the teacher isn't involved is that you can go back and see the answers to their questions. So there's that built-in accountability. And we really like that for PearDeck. You can go to the next one, Rachel. And so this is the difference between the, you know, student-paced and the instructor-paced. So the student-paced allows you to, you know, you get to use all the features of PearDeck, but you get to engage with the content on your own asynchronously, or in this case, in these smaller groups. And then the instructor-paced is obviously what we're doing together in real time. So those are the difference between the two different ways that you can use PearDeck with your students. And then on the next slide,
April, real quick, I'm just going to model because we are in a PearDeck. Yes. I do have it set on student pace today so that you guys can, you know, go back and forth between the slides as you see fit. But I'm going to stop that for a moment. So if you want to open up the PearDeck, if you were following along, I just want you to know what that's going to feel like for your students. So if I stop that student pace, it should have brought you to the slide that I'm on. So if you were off on a different slide, automatically you get pulled to the same slide as me, and you no longer have the ability to advance forward or go back. So another great way to engage both of your students at the same time to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Sorry, Rachel, I thought you had them in the instructor activity. So
yeah, no worries.
So does everybody understand that you have control as the teacher to whichever mode you want them in, depending on that kind of learning situation that you're in? So just some ideas that you can use PearDeck in stations or centers. These rotation models are, you know, creating some exit tickets. So at the end of a session, you could have an exit ticket where they had to maybe, you know, answer some questions so that you could, again, follow up on that accountability piece. They can label maps, mind maps, that drawing piece again. I love that. Just working on vocabulary. There's the ability to drag and drop different pieces around, and you can annotate on any text again, like with labeling. And I like the ability to ask some multiple choice questions just throughout maybe the session or that station to check for understanding. And then I think that what's great is the teacher can go back and look at all of this later and go, oh, you know what? I really need to hit that again, or I need to go over that piece again because nobody understood it. So what did I do wrong, and kind of reflect on maybe how I could make that better for my students. But there's multiple opportunities to check for understanding in these stations, and I love the ability for kids to go at their own pace and use some of the built-in accessibility tools in PearDeck to really engage with the content a little bit more. And I don't know, Rachel, if you want to open up and share your screen and how you kind of get started. And Rachel, you can talk them through this since you're sharing it.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I accidentally stopped sharing. That's not what I meant to do. So I'm going to get up my entire. All right, are we seeing all my tabs here? Okay, so you'll see that right now I'm on my Google Slides tab. So I'm going to stop present mode here. And in your toolbar on Google Slides, so you can just create a Google slide as you normally would. And then under add-ons, you have an option for PearDeck. When you click that, you'll get your PearDecks over here on the side. And then this is really how you can make things interactive. So I'm going to, for example, come up to this question because this was a multiple choice question that I had you all answer. So I chose this from their template library here. And then I just adjusted the question on my own. So I think I got it from the during lessons activity. And I scrolled until I found the multiple choice slide. And then I just edited that on my own. But you can also just, after you build a slide, you have all of these tools here that says ask students a question. So I could take any one of these and click what I want it to be, how I want my students to interact with it, whether I want them to use a text box, multiple choice, enter in a number. You guys saw earlier I had the Padlet linked. I did that by choosing the website tool. You can give them the option to draw on top of a slide or to drag different icons around. So just by clicking on that, I'll just demonstrate here. I click on it, it's working for me. And now I've got my little thing at the bottom, and I know that when my students get on this slide, when I start my lesson, they will get a text box, which you saw earlier, what that looks like for you as a student and how your students can then just type their response in there. So it was as simple as that, me clicking a button, now they have a text box. And then of course, with your other choices, you have ways that you can manipulate, obviously, or change what kind of responses they give. And also with PearDeck, you have the option to add audio to slides. So if you have students that are struggling readers, you've got a built-in recording device right here. You record your voice over the slide, and it just pops up as a little audio button, and your students can then participate and work on it asynchronously. So again, when you think about those centers that your students might be working in, you can provide instructions for what they're going to complete in their PearDeck. If we think about word work, if you've had foundations tiles built into a Google slide, you could articulate the word for your students, and then they go ahead and build it right on that slide. And then you have your built-in accountability there.
And we also love the ability to add audio to slides. So as students are working asynchronously, they can still hear your voice. And so that's another powerful tool of PearDeck, especially when working asynchronously or in small groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Teresa, I saw you had your hand up.
Thank you. Rachel, could you actually show us a slide that you might use for vocabulary work or a mind map, please?
Yes. Give me just a second again. I'm going to put a tab up this time so I can see what I'm doing here. So again, PearDeck has their template library. So you might look in either the during lesson templates or critical thinking for, I'm thinking about mind maps at the moment. I believe they have some somewhere in here.
And you could also make your own mind map in Google Slides, and then add the ability for them to add the text in the bubbles. That's probably what I would do. That way you can customize it for whatever work that you're working on.
Yeah, I think that's the way I would go about it too, April, is I would, you know, create my own slide this way and add in the graphic organizer or mind map that I wanted students to use. And then I would turn it into a drawing PearDeck so that students could then write on top of the slide. And so you can import a graphic organizer by choosing an image there. Like I remember Teresa, you and I worked on that earlier this year. So I would do it that way and then just turn it into a drawing slide. But they also, I know.
You said import? I'm sorry, you said import?
Yes, so I would do background and I would set an image. So I would take a screenshot of a graphic organizer and then set it as the background for students.
I gotcha. And then click on draw.
Yes. Yep.
And then we'd be good to go.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yes. Let me get rid of that.
Yeah, I know that, you know, there's a lot about, definitely a lot to PearDeck. And so, let's see, on slide, Rachel, on slide 31, we also have a, you know, again, another PDF, a quick start guide that just will kind of get you started, and also some ideas in ways to use PearDeck, and also a self-paced slide deck that kind of just goes through those, and this is a PearDeck self-paced course, or not course, but you know, a self-paced PearDeck that you can go through on your own and kind of use some of those features to kind of get your hands on it a little bit if you've never used it. But it is a great and powerful tool where you can really gain a lot of insight from your students, especially in the asynchronous time and those station rotations. So again, I know that that's a ton of content and not a lot of time, but feel free to reach out to any of us on the EdTech team for any additional help or support on any of these tools to even go a little bit deeper. We know that you guys are probably already pros in most of it, but sometimes it's just helpful to get a few helpful tips and tricks. With that, we also put together just a quick PDF of some, you know, some common tech issues and some solutions that maybe you face that you'll go, oh my gosh, that's how I figure that out, or that's how I do that. And so hopefully we're trying to think ahead in some issues that you may have faced. And then we just added another one in the notes section of this slide deck that just has a video that you can share with students. I made it this morning, but I tried to make it as friendly for kids, but it's specifically in using you know, Google Meet with K2 students and how they can switch between multiple apps and share their screen, and also use slide over and things like that on their iPad device. So hopefully it's a video that you could share with them. You could even give that to them as homework and have them watch it and then kind of discuss it, you know, maybe the next day. And that's all I have for you. And then, yep, there's all of our information.
Yeah, and I have our information here. So we've got tons of resources for you on our TLN Hub. Our email is there if you want to reach out to our entire C&I team. We're here to be thought partners with you as you do this planning. And then we have just a whole bunch of resources here for you. We put together a back to school guidance document for some things you might consider. We have some voices from teachers who are have been back in person, things that they wished they would have known. So I highly recommend checking that out. It's very, very helpful. And then I just want to make sure I leave this slide up. We will be able to unmute, but in our PearDeck, if you'd like to add any questions in there that you still have, that way we can have those and make sure that we address them for you. But let's see, I saw Melanie, you had your hand up.
Yes. So in learning all these, they're all amazing. But as a district, I know I was on the IC budget, and we were discussing like what our school would want to pay for, like PearDeck, or what is APS going to supply these, or
so you actually already have you have a PearDeck premium account that was purchased, I think, in January. Is that right, April?
Mm-hmm.
So you should be able to log in and have the premium access to that.
And we just secured PearDeck and Seesaw and Google Enterprise accounts for all teachers next year as well. So it doesn't have to come out of school operational budgets. Yeah.
So it was PearDeck, Seesaw, and what? I'm sorry?
And Google Enterprise, which is all the extras that you have in like Google Meet and things like that, breakout rooms, all of that kind of stuff.
Oh, fantastic.
So basically,
awesome.
Yeah, the tools you're using this year, as far as those go, you'll have them again next year.
Yeah. Who knows about the year after that, but for right now, we're good.
Teresa, Teresa, excuse me, you had your hand up.
Rachel, I was wondering if we could also get the template for the math asynchronous choice board.
Yes, so I'm going to share a link to this slide deck with you, and those are all linked. So if you just click right on the image, you will get that. Nadine?
I know that this is just one way that the day could be organized with these rotations. I think that at La Mesa, we're still in the stages of we don't know what other options we have. So we really need something that says like, okay, here's this, this, and this before we dive deep. Is there anything out there that has all of the options, or maybe not options is not the best word, but suggested ways to organize it before we really dive deep into it?
Yeah, so Lori just shared some links in the chat. If you didn't attend our hybrid overview, I highly recommend doing our self-paced PearDeck for that, because we provide 3 other models that you might consider, and then you can start to see how you could piece those together. And also, if you go to our TLN Hub back in January, we published a document just on station rotations and 4 different ways that you might group students that way. So that's also on our TLN Hub.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. And so now that we have them on our bar, we can share them. They're in our Google Drive, and then we can have them for later to go reference.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop our recording and